Before I call the Honourable Steve Whan, I remind honourable members that this is his inaugural speech in this chamber, and I would ask you to extend to him the usual courtesies. The Honourable Steve Whan.
Mr President, thank you. Thank you, Mr President. It is a pleasure to be able to make an inaugural speech in this place. At the outset and in my first contribution, I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land we meet on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and to the traditional owners of the lands we represent, particularly the area I come from around Queanbeyan and the Monero, with the Narragaow and Ngambri people. As most in the House in this place would be aware, I spent 8 years in the other place, and Hansard records many contributions to debate, including an inaugural speech. Nevertheless, I am delighted to be able to make some remarks in my first contribution to the Legislative Council. There's going to be a few of those for sure. Legislative Council. To be truthful, this is probably not a place I ever expected to see myself. However, given the opportunity to continue to make a contribution to New South Wales, particularly regional and rural New South Wales, and to good government, I was keen to take the opportunity up. The chance to play a role in a strong opposition and be part of bringing Labor back into government is one I'm looking forward to. A strong and effective opposition is essential for democracy, and Labor under John Robertson's leadership has made a very good start to fulfilling that role. I'm here today because I can play a part in the process, in particular in representing rural and regional New South Wales, along with my Country Labor colleague, the Honourable Mick Veitch. Country Labor might be a small group now, but we'll be working to get back to the days when Labor held the seats like Tweed and Clarence, Burrinjuck and Murrumbidgee, Murray-Darling, and of course the seats we held till recently, Monero, Bathurst and Maitland, as well as to having many more representatives in this place. Those opposite often forget that for most of the years since World War II, it has been Labor that has been the party that's delivered for country New South Wales. Irrigation projects that came from the Snowy scheme, a scheme opposed by the Nationals, driven by the Labor Party. Infrastructure like electricity, a whole range of projects driven by and delivered by Labor governments, often opposed by the Conservatives. At federal level, we're seeing that happen right now. The federal Labor government rolling out the NBN, a communications revolution for country New South Wales, the 2011 equivalent of the arrival of the railways, but opposed by the Coalition, who are happy to see New South Wales miss out on world's best technology. In this place, we may be few in numbers, but we still have a great group of Country Labor members in our country branches, the true believers who turn out at every election at the toughest of booths. And I want to thank those members for their commitment over many years. I also want to thank so many of them who expressed their support for me coming into this position, either in person or through emails, letters and phone calls. I also want to thank my colleagues in the Parliament for their support, and also many of my former colleagues who've indicated their support for me coming to this position. I'd like to thank Labor's State Secretary Sam Dastiari, Country Organiser Courtney Roach and Queanbeyan's own Tara Moriarty and the other party officials who've strongly supported me coming into this position. But believe it or not, it actually wasn't an instant decision to put myself forward for this position. But one of the things that made up my mind was the government's reaction. The theatrics from the Honourable Duncan Gay were a strong incentive to taking up the position in this place. He showed me how worried the government was by me coming in. And to top it off, they took the time out of the Premier's week, Mr President, to roll him out onto ABC TV to have a go at me as well. That certainly convinced me that it was a good move to come in here. Seriously though, I didn't make an instant decision. I had started a job only a week before with a former member of this place, the Federal Environment Minister Tony Burke. He was, however, extremely supportive, and I thank him firstly for giving me a job, but secondly for his support in coming back to this Parliament. Tony's an excellent minister dealing with some very important areas for New South Wales, including most particularly the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, and I note that since he's taken on responsibility for that, and since appointing former Minister Craig Knowles, the needs of New South Wales communities have been heard much more strongly. Most importantly, though, I needed the support of my wife Cherie, who is here in the gallery today, and my kids, Lockie and Maddie, who unfortunately aren't here with us today. They said, "We've seen you do an inaugural speech, Dad," and they're now 17 and 18 and have agendas of their own. But I'm sure that they have a life. but I'm sure that they're supporting as well, and they have indicated their support. The love and support of your family is something that makes particularly the tough times in politics bearable, and I've been lucky enough to have that from Cherie and the kids for my whole political career, and I thank them for that. It makes me feel very loved that even after 20 years of marriage, Cherie still misses me when I'm in Sydney. Carl Scully once said to me that Carl Scully once said to me that after being a member of this place for a short while, he asked one of the more experienced members, "Does your wife ever stop complaining about the time you're away in Parliament?" The response from his more senior colleague was that if she does, you should start worrying. Very good advice, I think. And while being here in Sydney is great and I enjoy the participation in Parliament, I am always very pleased to get back home to Queanbeyan, to my family, to my community and to my garden and my native plants and seedlings and things that I grow in my greenhouse. But having said that, obviously I'm one of 3 members here from Queanbeyan in this place, and yes, we are the emerging political capital of New South Wales, and maybe one day we'll move a parliament there for a special sitting or something. But I'm very proud of, in the other place as well, in the other place, of course, there is another member who I'll mention in a moment. Queanbeyan is a community that I love living in, and it's a community that has since I moved there, I grew up in Canberra actually, but moved there into Queanbeyan and have felt very welcome, and it's a community where we felt welcome all the time we've lived there. So thank you again to Cherie, Lachlan and Maddie for their support. Also to my parents, Jill and Bob Whan, who also would have loved to be here today, but my mum, Jill, had a cataract operation yesterday and is recovering from that today. Hopefully they might be listening or watching on the internet, but we'll see. And of course, many people know my father, Bob Whan, who was a staffer in this place and a former federal member of Parliament, and of course was the prime reason why, from the age of about 6 or 7 years old, I started being interested in politics. I also want to thank Cherie's parents, Roger and Leonie McLean, as well as our wonderful friends who've supported my political efforts and our family over the years. And when I made my inaugural speech to the Lower House back on the first day of sitting in 2003, I highlighted a number of things that I wanted to achieve and a number of principles that I thought were important. The important areas of equity and opportunity that I highlighted then, the reasons people join the Labor Party, are still there for me. Opportunity through quality public education, good public health care, and particularly primary health care. I'm pleased to say, though, that many of the specific projects I mentioned 8 years ago are things I no longer need to mention. That's because we delivered them. Over the last 8 years, Labor delivered hundreds of projects, grants and infrastructure improvements in Monero. We had some significant environmental achievements, some wonderful social achievements, particularly in areas like respite care. In the context of one of the biggest swings in history, that work was not enough to hold Monero, and I do congratulate my successor as member for Monero, John Barilaro, and I wish him all the best for his term in the Parliament. It was personally gratifying for me, though, that as the swing in Monero was one of the smallest against a member of the former government in the state. Indeed, I recorded the 15th highest Labor primary vote in the state. I know that the reality of politics is that the current government will spend most of the next few years repeating over and over again lines denigrating the achievements of the previous government. That's politics, and we may have even been known to do that at times as well. We got the message from the electorate in March, and we don't for a second fail to recognise the tough job we have to earn the trust of the electorate. But we can also be proud of some of the achievements. In Monero, new hospitals in Queanbeyan and Bombala, the biggest road investment around Queanbeyan in more than 30 years, new schools in Jerrabomba and Jindabyne, and literally hundreds of other achievements. I'm also very proud of the work I did as a minister in the former government, in emergency services where we boosted RFS and SES funding and resources, in primary industries where we made major investments in biosecurity, commenced work on food security strategies, took important steps in food safety and labelling and many other areas. I was privileged to work in those positions with many incredible public servants who showed every day that despite the cynicism about public service shown by some in our society, there are many people who are dedicated to public service and to providing the frank and fearless advice that government needs. In particular, some of the heads of the agencies I worked with, Richard Sheldrake, George Davey, Commissioners Greg Mullins, Shane Fitzsimmons, Murray Keir, all incredibly dedicated public servants who I know will give equally excellent service to the current government. Those leaders have working with them thousands of dedicated public servants who make good government possible and deserve our thanks. They certainly don't deserve to have as one of the first actions of this government the removal of the independent umpire when it comes to their remuneration. Of course, having had the great privilege of being Emergency Services Minister, I want to acknowledge again the inspiration that the volunteers and the emergency service workers provide. What an amazing bunch of people they are. And as I'm sure the current Minister saw last week, in a crisis, there is no one better than our New South Wales emergency service personnel to be there. In getting to this day of an opening speech in this place, I've had the support of some fabulous people. Labor Party branch members, particularly in Monero, who over many years have worked to promote our party. People like Jill Chapman, Gunter Prost, Anthony Selden, Tom Marvick, Brian Brown, Paul Whalen, Ben Duggan, and many, many more. I can't list all their names, unfortunately, but I hope they know who they are. My friend and our federal member, Dr Mike Kelly, has been a fabulous supporter of me. We were a great team, and I'm sure we still will be in some ways. My former staff, some of who, despite their fantastic skills, are unfortunately still looking for jobs. If anyone's got any ideas? But those former staff have made a great contribution to me being here today. The former Monero electorate staff, particularly Stephen Curran, who was with me in working for constituents from the day I was elected to the other place until he handed over the keys of the office to John. Lee Evans, who drove every day from Cooma to Queanbeyan and brought an incredible knowledge of people in the region, and a number of other of my staff in the electorate office, including over the years Sarah, Jane, Lucy, Martin, Kurt, Beck and Ben. When I was a minister, I had a fantastic team who called themselves the Whan Stars. I was delighted to have an office that people wanted to get into with almost no staff turnover. My Chief of Staff, Genevieve Slattery, can take a lot of the credit for that, and she was a fantastic person who had great experience of government. Lucy Clines was a wonderful deputy, who was someone I knew I could count on, right from when she came to work in my electorate office as a 20-year-old. Garth Montgomery, who was an amazing media advisor, and very tough media advisor, and is about to launch into a completely different world running martial arts and physical training, small business. Carol Hughes, Shannon Jameson, Lorraine Want, Teresa Chidiak, Dave Chalmers, Sophie Mallon, Kurt Steele, Julia Dropman, Barry Dowse, Kieran Doyle, Marty Stevens, Martin Gray, once you start you can't miss anyone out, Michael Hutchins, Martin Elms and Emile Waschaco all worked in my office over the time I was Minister. They served New South Wales outstandingly well by the jobs they did, and they also made me look good. I've come into this place as a person who over 8 years has enjoyed the forum of the Parliament. I enjoy the theatre, but much more importantly, I think Parliament is a vital democratic institution that needs to be nurtured and respected. And yes, I did hold the same views when we were in government. It disappoints me to see the way the efforts of Parliament and members of Parliament are so consistently trashed by media. No doubt there are some times when our actions contribute to this, but the sad fact is that the cynical portrayal of politics by the media does little to promote good people coming into politics and little to promote good government or good policy. We're lucky to live in a country that has such strong democratic tradition. It is something that we should all value. In my experience, the vast bulk of people who seek to become members of Parliament do so for the right reasons. They reflect society. That means there's a diversity of personalities, of intellects, of backgrounds and personal beliefs, and that's good. There will be a few who are accidents waiting to happen, particularly after an election result like the one we saw in March. But overall, they're people who are here because they want to achieve something for their communities. And while many people encouraged me to come into this place, there were certainly quite a number of who said, well, why do you want to do it? Why do you want to go back in? Why not join the private sector and make a bit of money? Why not go into a job where people don't always highlight the negatives? Well, why didn't I? Because I do think Parliament and serving the people is important, even in opposition. Over the last 8 years, I did sit through many speeches by Liberals and Nationals members where they also expressed views about the importance of Parliament. Imagine my disappointment to arrive back here and find that so many of these comments were hypocritical. Imagine the outrage from the Liberals and the Nationals if the former government had gagged debate in this place. Indeed, even in the lower house, I can't remember us doing it. Imagine the outrage from the Coalition if we'd gone against the balanced tradition of this place and snatched the committee chair positions for government members. And imagine the outcry if we'd slashed the staffing resources for opposition, as this government has, in a transparent attempt to try and destroy the capacity of opposition to scrutinise the actions of this already sneaky-looking government. It's already been a display of extreme arrogance, one which the short honeymoon period might cover up, but over future years will become increasingly exposed. And as someone who's been observing and participating in politics for most of my life, there is one important observation governments forget at their own peril. The wheel always turns. You will be back in opposition one day. I remember well Paul Keating's election victory in 1993 when some in the media predicted that he'd be there till the year 2000. And I've seen those same type of people predicting that this government will be here for 12 years. I'm here because I don't think it'll be 12 years, not maybe even 8. Let's face it, already just after 3 months, many public servants who voted for the coalition, including some of the 17,000 or so in the Monero electorate, are remembering why Liberal governments are so bad for them, for their families and for services to the community. This is an arrogant and cocky government already that seems to think they won't ever face the wrath of the electorate. They will, and it's very short-sighted to be stripping away the things that enhance accountability. Mr President, as part of the scrutiny of this government, I'm very delighted to have been appointed by the Labor leader John Robertson, and I thank him for coming along today to watch this inaugural. Be appointed as Shadow Minister for Resources and Primary Industries, Tourism, Major Events, Hospitality, Gaming and Racing, and Shadow Special Minister of State. I'm very much looking forward to being part of John Robertson's team and playing my part in developing policy and keeping the government honest. There aren't a lot of us on this side of the House who've got experience in opposition, although I was an opposition candidate, and in that role I was always at pains not to fall into the constant negativity that some oppositions take on. I will be trying to balance the inevitable need to provide a critical perspective of government's actions with a positive agenda and positive actions. There are tough issues in many of these portfolios, not the least of which is achieving the balance between competing land uses, jobs and economic development in regional areas versus often legitimate questions and environmental concerns. I see as ongoing priorities the needs for whole of government action on planning for food security, an issue that involves not just competing land uses between minerals and agriculture, but also water policy, urban development and agricultural research and productivity. And I'm looking forward to working with my colleague, the Honourable Mick Veitch, on ideas that I've brought with me from previous work in things like the Rural and Regional Task Force. In tourism and major events, hospitality, gaming and racing, I'll be a strong supporter of tourism in New South Wales, particularly regional tourism, promoting areas like the wonderful Snowy Mountains. For those who don't know, there's been about 50 centimetres of snow. If you've got some time out, take a visit up there and have a look. It's a great place and it's one of my favourite parts of the country. And of course I'll also be working for the people who work in those industries, particularly and including the people in clubs and pubs. But I won't hesitate to highlight broken promises, and I'll certainly be taking a very active interest in the things that happen and need to happen in country electorates, including the Monero electorate. I've expressed strong views over the years about many issues that concern the people I've represented. Public education is one area I'm passionate about. As a Labor member, I firmly believe every child's opportunity in life should be built on a foundation of strong, accessible education. We have a fantastic education system in New South Wales, one we should be proud of. It's built on a long-term commitment of resources from governments in New South Wales over the years, mainly Labor governments, on great efforts of dedicated teachers and, importantly, parents and school communities. But it should still be a concern to us all that all too often the ultimate level of achievement in education seems to be so closely linked to a family's socio-economic status. And it is a concern to me, and I'm sure to many others, that sometimes parents don't understand the vital role they play in their child's education, whether that's from reading to your child or showing your child by example the importance of school by turning up at events, P&Cs, etc. Another important issue that I wanted to highlight today is that I've been a member for some years of a locally based group, Clean Energy for Eternity, and that's because I've been concerned about climate change. The CSIRO's predictions on climate change should worry everyone in this place, and certainly anyone who cares about our rural industries, our alpine areas and that wonderful ski industry that I just mentioned, and the industries based on them, or indeed anybody who cares about the future. I've heard the climate change deniers try to justify their position, but overwhelming scientific opinion is clear. And what else is absolutely clear is that in 20 to 30 years' time, people will look back on Tony Abbott and those in the opposition with the same sort of amusement reserved for the flat earthers. At least I hope we'll be able to look back with amusement and not have to look back with despair over lost opportunities. It seems to me that even if you don't agree with climate change, it's very hard to argue logically that in pricing a good, you should not count in some way, at least, the impact that the production of that good causes. I would have thought that even the free market zealots would feel some appeal to a structure which puts money in the consumer's hand and allows them to make choices about what and how much they will consume, or indeed that allows them to, by changing their own consumption patterns, keep some money in their own pockets. As a representative of regional New South Wales, I also have strong views about the sort of things we need to attract people to inland communities, the things that make country communities great places for families to relocate to. The opposition supported last night the government's regional relocation bill. We agree with the sentiment, the objective of getting people to relocate out of Sydney. I don't think anyone would disagree that it is desirable to reduce population growth pressures on Sydney and encourage growth that utilises underutilised infrastructure in regional communities and, importantly, provides skilled workers in regional New South Wales. But we supported this bill because the government made an election commitment. The program itself is weak and, frankly, deeply flawed. $7,000 subsidies for 40,000 people to move to regional areas, $280 million of taxpayers' money with no performance standards at all. There is nothing in the policy to make sure these funds are going to people who otherwise would not have moved, not even a measurement to see if it's made a difference to the decision. Country people do want to see government have a go at regional development, but they don't want to see money wasted, particularly when there are so many things in regional New South Wales that could be done. Just counting the number of people who get the grant is not a performance measure. I mean, should we, for instance, be subsidising people who are retiring to the coast? The bottom line is there's nothing in that bill to ensure that it results in a single additional person moving to New South Wales. I hope it does, but it's more than likely it'll be wasted money. Think of the things we could have done with $280 million for regional New South Wales. Programs to build residential facilities at regional university campuses, for example, so that we could attract students who, having studied in regional areas, might stay to live. Let's hope I'm wrong, but this program has all the hallmarks of a poorly thought through and hastily constructed program. And it's a bit symptomatic of a government with grand titles for programs but a hodgepodge underneath them. The regional relocation policy was obviously designed in part to placate the areas of Sydney concerned about denser population growth or urban sprawl. I don't think it does that either. Despite the fact that I do talk a lot about rural and regional New South Wales, I do also care about Sydney, about lifestyles and facilities. And it seems to me that NIMBYism dominates the rest of the Coalition's planning for the future of Sydney. I remain concerned about comments the Coalition made in the lead-up to the election that suggested that they rejected denser urban population centred around public transport nodes in Sydney, instead seeing the bulk of future population growth occurring in Western Sydney. At the time this policy was announced, I raised concerns about the future of open spaces in Western Sydney and particularly the future of viable agriculture in the Sydney Basin. The Sydney Basin is part of our state's food security. It is still a vital source of fresh fruit and veggies, and the government's attitude to urban development puts that at risk. I was disappointed I didn't get the opportunity to speak on the regional relocation bill because I could go on, but for today I'll draw that part of it to a close. I did, before concluding, want to mention the bill which is being debated today on marine parks, and the opposition is opposing the bill put forward by the Shooters and Fishers Party. There's a couple of very strong reasons for that, and as a former minister who is involved in the number of these marine park decisions, I wanted to put some of those on the record as well. I particularly want to comment, though, on the decision the government made recently to reverse the zoning decisions in the Jarvis Bay area particularly, but also around the Coffs Harbour area and around Fish Rock. Now, the Jarvis Bay decision itself is quite bemusing because in the process we went through of consultation, there was overwhelming support for the final outcome for that Jarvis Bay Marine Park. It's been a marine park which recreational fishers have loved for many years. Like the Bateman's Marine Park, I get constant feedback from recreational fishers about how much better the fishing opportunities are in those areas, since particularly elements of commercial fishing were taken out of some of the estuaries. And living in Queanbeyan, but having close contacts with the South Coast, that is a consistent message I get from those marine parks. Now, this bill is not necessary because before the election, the last government actually did say that we wouldn't introduce further parks until these were bedded in and we'd been able to see how well they were accepted by the community. In the marine park around the Coffs Harbour area, we went through a very long consultation process on this, and I can tell you that Frank Sartor, the former minister, and I spent many hours working out how we could protect the rights and opportunities for recreational fishers. And the eventual outcome that came out of that did protect the ability for recreational fishers in many parts of that marine park It also, very importantly, and this is something I would have thought the National Party would have been concerned about, protected the prawn trawling through an important part of that area. We actually looked at the satellite, the maps of exactly where the trawl patterns were in that marine park to work out how we could protect that industry and make sure that we, while ensuring that we enhance the protection zones, also retained a viable industry, because we recognise that Australian seafood is a vital part of what New South Wales people should be able to get at the fish markets. Fish markets is something I might come back to in a future contribution to this place. And it's something where we don't want to just rely on imports, because we know that when we are fishing in our areas, we and the federal government can at least control production intake to make sure that we are achieving a sustainable fishery. But Fish Island, where measures were put in place to protect grey nurse sharks, breeding hens, Fish Rock is one that I particularly wanted to mention. When I became Minister for Primary Industries in the last government, Fish Rock wasn't something which was on my agenda. It came on my agenda for one reason only. The now Deputy Premier, Andrew Stoner, came to see me with a member of the dive community to say that the existing protections around Fish Rock weren't adequate. He came to see me to tell me that we needed to review the protections and offer some further protection to the rock. Now, he wasn't particularly specific in what he wanted to see, but from there I took his suggestion and asked my department to come up with a paper to consult with the community. Now, they came up with a consultation paper which certainly went further than a lot of people in the community wanted to see. It certainly went further than recreational fishers wanted to see. I, in responding to that, modified the proposal and pulled it right back down to quite small areas around Fish Rock, because I felt that is something which might have got bipartisan support. And I knew that bipartisan support was going to be important to getting long-lasting protection on that. Because I think there is actually something that when you're in government you need to look at, is will your reform survive the next change of government? And that's something which I had in mind there. I think it's unfortunate that the Coalition has reversed that position. Sensible protection which allowed recreational fishing to continue around Fish Rock within quite a short distance of Fish Rock, but also offered further protection from grey nurse sharks, who the evidence showed were being hurt by particularly some of the hooks which were being used in the area. So, Mr. President, I stand by the decision I made, particularly in Fish Rock there, and I think it is a shame that was reversed. I find those reversals to be slightly dishonest in the way they were made, particularly in the public comments that were made, but understand that this government is now in the place to be able to do that. However, I think that when the scientific review that's being undertaken comes up with some of the suggestions, and I was interested to note the government's comment before from the minister opposite, where he said that the government's review may result in additional areas being protected. That's something which we didn't hear a lot about, but if that's justified, I'm sure we would all agree. Mr. President, as a former minister for that, I thought it was important to put on record some of the history of those decisions. Marine parks are an important part of protection of species around New South Wales waters, and not just for conservation's sake, but for recreational fishing's sake as well. It's something which I've had very strong feedback from recreational fishers about, and in particular many areas of support. One of the other things that as Minister I was very pleased to be able to do in many areas around the coast was using the funds raised through the recreational fishing licence fees, which the former government put in place with the support of recreational fishers, was to actually create a number of artificial reefs and reef balls in many parts of the state, and they're a wonderful enhancement to recreational fishing and something which I hope will continue under this current government. But Mr. President, I thank the House and Sharif for coming up, and all my colleagues for coming in to watch. I thank you all for your attention to my inaugural speech. It's a great privilege and an honour to be in this place, and I'm sure that I'll enjoy it. I also hope that I'll do all those who supported me proud in performing my functions here.
the Leader of the House.
To go.
Appropriate for the Leader of the House.
Stand the heat.
Is there a convention in this place that this government won't trash?
Gags debate. Leave. Yeah, but he's not the leader. He's not the leader.
Order.
Add it to a very
Is member
long-
seeking the call?